Hey, you can get some cool and fun rewards for helping me help kids. Stick around after the video for more information.
The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can really easily take for granted, at least speaking for myself, digging into history and languages when I'm able to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and then apply at least some of what God has for us in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope that you are doing that with me as we make our way now through the book of Philippians. We just started it last time, and we have arrived now at chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. And in the ESV that reads, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So looking just at those first two verses, 3 and 4, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy. This was a common attitude expressed by Paul in many of his letters. Thankfulness for other believers seemed to be a virtually built-in part of his thought and prayer life, either naturally as a result of how he saw other aspects of life in light of all that God had done, or as a discipline built into his life. I don't really know. The ideas of joy and rejoicing are found just peppered throughout this book. The Greek word for joy here can refer to an exuberant, celebratory attitude of happiness, what maybe typically would come to mind when we think of the word joy, but it's also described in respected Greek lexicons as calm delight. It's interesting that Paul says that every prayer of his for the Philippians contained an element of joy. This would even include emotionally weighty prayers of concern for them. The biblical concept of joy is not a simplistic emotion easily described as being in a positive mood or a good mood. It can be this quiet pleasure or contentment that lies at the foundation of other emotions. Verse 5, which is kind of mid-sentence, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. So the context then, he says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Paul is thankful and joyful as he prays for and thinks about the Philippian church members because of their partnership in the gospel, he says, which began when the church first started and has apparently continued until this point in Paul's life, 10 years later. The Greek word here for partnership is koinonia, which is a word that might sound familiar to you. Maybe you've heard it somewhere before. I know there's at least one ministry, I think, named after that word. It's translated elsewhere in the New Testament as fellowship or participation, and it contains the idea of community and an ongoing common bond. Paul is expressing a connection based on both familial bond that he has with them and the shared experience of life lived in and through Christ that he and the Philippian Christians have experienced, resulting from Christ's sacrificial work on the cross. And then verse 6, I am sure of this, he says, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Although Paul has been speaking glowingly of the Philippian Christians, he simultaneously sees God as the one at work in and through them. And he trusts that God's work in them will continue and culminate at the day of Jesus Christ, he says. This phrase is borrowed and modified from the Old Testament expression, the day of the Lord, L-O-R-D, all caps, or as more closely in the original Hebrew, Yahweh, God's proper noun, personal name. The day of Yahweh. Some examples of the use of that phrase would be Isaiah 13:6, Ezekiel 33, Joel 2:31, and Amos 5:20, but it's all over the place in the Old Testament. But where the day of the Lord or the day of Yahweh is described primarily as a time of judgment on the world, the day of Jesus Christ as it is called in various forms, 1 Corinthians 1:8, 1 Corinthians 5:5, 2 Corinthians 1:14, and then in this book, Philippians 1:10 after this, and Philippians 2:16. In those contexts and in various forms that are all essentially saying the day of Jesus Christ, it's described in the context of victory and reward for God's people. As we choose to participate in God's work in us, our lives are building toward an ultimate moment of rescue and triumph. And that's what Paul is expressing confidence in regarding the Philippian church and the work that God's doing in them. Okay, so what's in all this for geeks? I will be the first to admit I have very little natural affection for people at my church, especially when I only bring to mind the abstract idea of quote-unquote church people, which kind of conjures images of uncomfortable small talk with virtual strangers before and after church services, or maybe suspicious or uncomfortable tones in the voices of people who don't know me as well as they hear me talking about my hobbies, and they kind of raise an eyebrow and stuff. So it's those more uncomfortable, less enjoyable parts of interaction with other people is often what comes to mind when I think about church people or the church. That's kind of like the default that my mind goes to. Every week on the Christian Geek Central podcast and the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel, I deliberately put a spotlight on the importance and value of being a part of the local church. But I got to tell you guys, that doesn't mean I naturally love being with other Christians. I don't. It's always something I have to choose to do. Paul's attitude toward this local church, I think, is a good model for those of us who might naturally gravitate toward just staying home and just streaming a church service. That's become even more widespread and easily available now because of COVID-19. And something going on in our church right now is they're trying to figure out how to gently call back those who are still staying home watching a service via stream that maybe don't need to be, So I think what Paul is expressing here, what we see in his life, how he's thinking about the local church is a really good model for us. He actively is thanking God for these other Christians, bringing specific reasons to mind for why he is grateful for them. I think that's a good thing for us to get into a habit of doing, even if it's not natural. I think a lot of times, for me personally, most of the time, being thankful about things in general is not natural. Just in my quiet time this morning, I was saying, God, help me throughout the day as I experience good things to be thankful. And to properly credit God as the source of all the good things I enjoy. And I think that, likewise, we would do well to train ourselves to associate the local church with those people in the local church that we're grateful for and the specific reasons that we're grateful for them. Specifically, Paul thanks God for believers who are pursuing partnership with God. Seeing them as people in process with a promise from God for a beautiful future in Christ's kingdom for them forever. I've made Psalm 16 a regular part of my quiet time because it contains so many things that I personally need to be encouraged, corrected, and challenged by every day. Psalm 16 verse 3 in particular says in the ESV, "As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight." And that's challenging for me to have that perspective. Now, although through Christ all believers are saints, the concept in the Old Testament that's in Psalm 16:3 would have referred more to those among God's people who were specifically actively choosing to live their lives for God. I've noticed that as I specifically turn my thoughts toward those believers in my life that are part of my local church who are actively pursuing partnership with God, I have very different thoughts about them than my general thoughts about quote-unquote church people or the church. Now, it's not that we aren't supposed to love the average church attender, far from it, but we are encouraged to especially delight in relationships with believers who are humbly and intentionally living for Christ. Those are life-giving relationships. Maybe you've noticed that too, if you can think about some people in your life at your local church that are just intentionally and humbly living for Christ. Those can be just some wonderfully life-giving interactions and times spent with people like that. Defining the church based on those relationships really helps to turn my attitude in a better direction from from where it just naturally defaults. I am so grateful for people like my study mentor, people like my discipleship buddy, people like that humble and friendly drummer that I'm on worship team with sometimes, and many more that I don't naturally bring to mind when I think about the church or church people. And on top of that, these people that I'm so grateful for, they're not perfect, but they are promised a day of victory over all sin, as Paul is kind of reflecting on and recognizing here, that they're people that are in process, just like I certainly am. And there's hope for these relationships, as flawed as they are, to actually be the beginning of relationships that will be perfected and will just be increasingly wonderful, extending into eternity. So I want to encourage all of us this week to think about specific, humble, intentional Christ followers in our local churches and thank God for particular things about them, while also thanking God for the process He has us all in that's going to culminate in this forever life of amazing relationships with people who, being fully rescued from sin, we're only going to want to know and enjoy more and more. If you'd like some help finding a good church in your area, I would love to help you do that if I can. Online resources and communities are good supplements, but by nature they just can't speak to your particular situation like relationships in a local church can. The context for almost everything in the New Testament assumes that we're serving and building purposeful relationships in a local church. So whether you're in a church that just kind of lacks Bible-based intentionality or maybe not attending any church at all, if I can help you get connected to an authentic, compassionate, Bible-oriented church, I want to do that. You can email me at paeter@spiritblade.com, and we can look at some websites of churches in your area together. For my 7th consecutive year, I'm participating in Extra Life, a charity event that raises funds to provide medical care for children in urgent need. I'm also leading the Christian Geek Central Extra Life team, which you're still welcome to join by following the link in the description below. Once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will stream live on youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral and ChristianGeekCentral.com beginning 5 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 7th. You can donate on my page or any team member's page by following the links below, where you will also find incentives and rewards for doing so. On my page, for example, for a donation of $5, you can choose a topic to add to my +3 page of many topics that I'll be blabbing my opinions on during the live stream. For $10, you get the previous reward and a download code for a free copy of the Spirit Blade Special Edition audio drama. For $20, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a game for me to play during my November 7th live stream. Pick a favorite or torture me with something terrible or rage-inducingly difficult. For $30, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a song for me to sing during my November 7th live stream. Pick an old favorite of yours or just make me humiliate and torture myself with something nobody wants to hear. And for $50 or more, you get the previous rewards and a download code for every MP3 product at spiritblade.com. That's an $80 value. On top of that, I have set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. At $200, I'll have a free download day for everyone who visits spiritblade.com on November 11th. And as my total goes beyond $200, I'll unlock increasingly more content for the free download day. And depending how far beyond $200 my fundraising goes, during my November 7th live stream, I will show embarrassing clips of a movie I made in college with fellow Spirit Blade actor Michael Tully, put on a pair of Frozen socks and a Frozen t-shirt at the same time, shoot water up my nose with a turkey baster, and have my wife Holly play a video game with me for 30 minutes. And if I reach a personal fundraising total of $500 or more, I will face my greatest and most hated enemy in video gaming. I will finally beat Super Mario Bros. Without using cheat codes by the end of 2020, publishing video of my efforts and eventual success, and also make my first attempts during my Extra Life marathon. I freaking hate that game, but I will do this for those kids and their families, and for you sadistic people who donate money to make it happen. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. I hope you will be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central team do some good for some kids and families who really need it. And then I hope you'll join me at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral for my 24-hour video gaming marathon starting 5 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday, November 7th. Hope to see you then.